having families in temporary accommodation is incredibly disruptive for those families. So, we're all trying to change the dial. I mean, ultimately, it's trying to provide more social housing and increase the pace and scale of housing delivery. I mean, housing is a national problem. You look at the scale of construction going on at the moment, it's very much carrying on apace. So, you're absolutely right. It's a challenging economic climate. So I think there is more of a balance and a finer line now to make development viable. But the scale of activity in the city is still very strong at the moment. So I'm sure you're right. On some sites, developers are thinking it's now the right time to press ahead. With inflation still increasing.
Ian, as a director of planning in Birmingham, tell us a little bit more about what that role entails and what that means and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Planning Officer for Birmingham, so I manage the whole planning function for the city, whether that's covering planning management. So we generally deal on an average year of about 8,000 planning applications a year across Birmingham. So there's a whole number of teams dealing with those the applications that come in. So we've got a household planning team, and then 4 area planning teams that cover the city as a whole, so that they all work on an area basis. So you have area planning managers, and then also development planning teams, which are looking at more, for example, master plans and the future direction of the city from there, as well as a policy team then, which looks at the longer term strategy for Birmingham overall. So they're leading on work with the Birmingham Development Plan and a review of that plan, and the associated community infrastructure levy sort of sits alongside that, which supports its delivery in terms of developers and what we charge for the impact of developments and particular applications as they come through. So you've got that whole planning team, and then also manage the transport team. So Phil Edwards, who's
that falls under your remit of transport as well.
That's right, yeah. So Phil Edwards, who's my assistant director for transport, he then leads on the transport agenda. So we've got the Birmingham Transport Plan, which is one of our key transport documents in terms of the future strategy for the city, increasing public transport, cycling, walking, more pedestrianisation, how we gradually move away from reliance on the car. So that's, Phil's area of work, and that gets into things like, 20-mile-an-hour neighbourhoods and, making streets more pedestrian and cycle friendly, and also sustainability as well. So the sustainability and the Route to Zero team report to me. So we've got Ellie Horwich-Smith there as our assistant director for sustainability. And that whole decarbonisation agenda. So around about overall, it's about 300 staff who report to me directly.
Okay. And so we're right now, we're in the council house, and as we were trying to find parking to get here, I keep seeing buildings. I think I've never noticed that building before. Yeah. So there's a huge change happening within the city centre.
Yep.
And certainly from my days as a kid in the Bullring, it's very, very different now. Where do you see that change going, and how do you see the city changing?
Yeah, so, I mean, the city centre's undergone a fairly rapid period of change now over the last, I would say, probably, we adopted the Big City Plan back in 2010, which set the framework for a number of the schemes that you see coming forward now. So, Paradise Circus just outside, the origins of that were within that document. Birmingham Smithfield, where we've got the joint venture with Lend-Lease, which is in for planning currently. Another big scheme coming forward. You've seen the changes at Arena Central, other big schemes coming forward at Snow Hill. So the Big City Plan set that framework. We're now in the process of reviewing that document with the Future City Plan and the sort of next generation of big schemes which will come forward from there. And particularly how we respond more positively around climate change and delivering more inclusive growth. So we've seen some great success in the city centre, metro as well, and, improving public transport connectivity around the city core. But the big agenda going forward is how now the city centre responds to climate change, and it's particularly getting the inner city wards around Birmingham better connectivity into the city centre itself, and improving access there, and also so that those wards benefit from the jobs and investment that's being created in the city core.
Yes. So there's certainly much more easy ways to get into the city centre now with regards to the metro, bicycle routes, etc. So I guess car drivers like myself at some point need to give up the car. Will it be a case of the city centre will become less car friendly, or do you think there'll still be space for multiple methods of transport within the city centre.
You'll still be able to drive into the city centre if that's what you want to do. I think the immediate, well, certainly the priority sort of going forward is to try and stop the through traffic through the city centre, particularly with the tunnels and the flyovers. That's a huge volume of traffic that just runs straight through the heart of the city centre. So the Birmingham Transport Plan talks about how we push that traffic out onto the ring road, looking at the tunnels and the future of the tunnels and the flyovers and how we can gradually push traffic away. So if you want to come into the city centre, it's more about visiting, say, the gun quarter or whatever part you want to go to, without necessarily just using it to drive through to get out across Birmingham and get to the motorways. So if you're going to do that, we'd be looking to push onto the ring road. And so there's less of that through traffic, just cutting through the heart of the city centre itself. So there's plans there to do that. But ultimately, if you still need to get into the city centre and that's your objective, you'll still be able to do that by car. And particularly, for other groups who need car access, other groups with disabilities, etc., they'll always be able to access the city centre by car as well. So, but the intention is, we do need to move away from our reliance on the car. Birmingham's been very much a car-dominated city, and you look at the infrastructure, within Birmingham, a large proportion of the city centre is used for, the ring roads and the A38 running through the middle. So actually getting that road space, making it more pedestrian, cycling, better use of public transport on that infrastructure is going to be important as we go on that journey moving forward.
Yes. The the centres evolved from it being business to having more residential property, and a lot of that has been single occupation, 1-2 people maybe living together. There also seems to be more of a trend of more families coming in and an appeal for families living in the city centre.
Absolutely, and we want that to continue. There's been a lot of 1- and 2-bedroom apartment development within the city centre, which is great, and demand for that still seems to be strong, which is good. But we do need to diversify the mix within the city centre. So getting more family accommodation in, whether that can be family apartments, not just traditional housing, but we'd like to see more family accommodation coming through. And some of the developments we've got coming forward, like Smithfield, will include, for example, school space, which will help and hopefully attract more families into the city centre as well. So I think it's important we get the infrastructure right in terms of access to schools, which are obviously more important to families, and, good quality green spaces, which will encourage more families to come in directly into the city centre itself. So yeah, but very much something we want to continue and encourage more.
And most of that is apartments as opposed to houses, would you say? Because there's very little housing,
correct,
as such within the city centre.
It can be, but there's also opportunities within the city centre for more traditional, albeit probably more high density family housing as well. So if you look at the future city plan, there's areas there where we're looking at potential regeneration that could be more family housing focused rather than apartments. So the next stage of that document now is to get into the detail of some of those areas and say, well, where could we reintroduce, potentially redevelop areas for high quality family accommodation. So I think you'll see a mix, I think that when it is family housing, it'll be more akin to the higher density developments that you've seen, for example, like in Port Loop, where they've used modular construction and ideas like that to get higher density development in there. But that could provide a very good, high quality living environment for families as well. So it's about getting that mix right.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of more recently, we've seen a lot more high-rise buildings starting to appear in Birmingham. For a long time, there wasn't many new high-rise buildings. When we look at maybe across Coventry, for example, not far from here, you see a lot more high-rise here. Do you think that's changing in Birmingham? And is it the tallest buildings being constructed?
Yeah, One East Side is coming forward, which will be with the tallest building within the city centre to date. So I've got no problems with high-rise buildings. It's about getting them in the right locations. So again, the future city plan gives an indication of the areas where we want to see high-rise development. In some locations, it isn't appropriate, maybe because the impact on heritage assets or heritage buildings. But in other locations, there's no reason why we can't be building 50 stories. So I think where, the market demand is there and the location is right, there's no reason why high density development can't come forward, and it's something we'd still want to encourage.
Yes. And I've been involved in probably about nearly 17 years now, and all were born in the second city, love the second city. We always felt like we're the poor cousin to Manchester. There seem to be much more development and growth and activity and regeneration happening there. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I don't think so now. I think if you go back, maybe a decade or so, that would be a fair point. But I think Birmingham city centre and the city's economy as a whole, if you look at us, we're one of the strongest in terms of foreign direct investment outside of London. So, we're performing very strongly. Look at the type of occupiers we've attracted at the city centre, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, you've got PwC in Paradise, all big name occupiers. And so I think, Manchester, has obviously done very well on their regen agenda in the past, but I think Birmingham now is very much developing its own market with HS2 coming in as well. That's going to make us very attractive in terms of the connections to London and hopefully to the north as well. So I think, the city's well placed and I think it's performing well. I wouldn't say now we're a sort of poorer relation, but both have their different markets, different demands. And I think, it's good to see Manchester growing. It's good to see Birmingham now really performing well economically as well.
Yes. And HS2 has been a key driver, I guess, to investment and some of the infrastructure that's being led that's happening in the city. And do you see that sort of spreading out other developments happening, like, for example, further afield, even though like Solihull is not your remit, but you're starting to see around there and you see a lot more development happening around those?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All this, do you think, just off the back of the HS2? And
yeah, I mean, well, we've got our Curzon master plan, which sets out the vision around the Curzon station. And there's massive opportunities for growth around there, utilising land around the station, but the wider sort of growth opportunities in the enterprise zone, which I think is about 2 billion enterprise zone project there. So massive opportunities around the station. And you're quite right to point out growth around the interchange site in Solihull. The council's a major landowner there with Varden Cross. We're a part of a consortium of landowners and at the NEC, where we still own the freehold car parks there. So we're very much supporting growth in that location, more from a landowner point of view. But you're right, between those two sites, you're talking about thousands of new homes and significant new commercial space as well. So, I think the opportunity with HS2 is not just in the city centre, it's in that wider regional impact as well. I think Solihull and, the wider region in terms of the supply chain and skills is really benefiting from that.
And what's your vision for the city? You've been given the top job to lead the way. What do you see as your vision for the city? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I think the future city plan gives a really good direction as to what we see now as the next key steps with the city centre and how we see that growth spreading into the suburban areas. We've still got inner city wards, 20% unemployment, so some massive challenges around delivering more inclusive growth and addressing some of the inequalities that we have in Birmingham. So, those are the big objectives of the future city plan. How we respond to climate change then is going to be really important. We talked about the car, but also greening the urban environment is going to be really important. So you see plans in the future city plan to take parts of the city centre, which are at the moment, older retail space. We want to reintroduce high density development, but also bring at the heart of those schemes new parks into the city centre. So there's more green space, more trees, where people can, get more shelter from what's going to be, the hotter climate that we're facing going forward. So I think there's two key aspects within there, but also a number of other development opportunities in the future city plan as well. So it gives a direction of travel about how we're trying to cross the inner ring road, provide better connections into these suburban areas and, really improve connectivity in and out of the city centre, better cycling, walking, green corridors, allowing people, say, from East Birmingham to come through the Coal Valley and, easily access the city centre. So I think that vision is pretty clear there. Then we've got the review of the Birmingham Development Plan going on currently. That will go out to preferred options early next year. Again, that's a really important strategic document for the city in terms of how we accommodate growth. So the plan we adopted in 2017, set out our plans for over 50,000 new houses, significant new jobs, over 200,000 new jobs created, major new employment allocations at sites like Peddingwar and Birmingham Wheels. So, that gives you the trajectory of the city's growth agenda overall, and that's the key strategic framework that we will operate in then going forward. So, that document is dealing with significant challenges around how we meet our future housing needs.
Yeah.
You're looking at annual housing completions, running on the current projections, even up to 7,000 per year in terms of new builds. So, those are really challenging numbers. So the Birmingham Development Plan is looking at how we can address that, maximising our brownfield development and really, making sure we accommodate as much of our own growth as we can within the city.
And what do you see as maybe some of the challenges rolling out that vision?
So it's the capacity in terms of housing needs. Delivering more affordable housing is a massive challenge for the city, because if you look at our housing completions are very strong across Birmingham overall. So, very much meeting our targets up to 2031, which is positive. But what we're not doing is building enough affordable housing within the city. So I think we're only hitting about 50% of our affordable housing targets. So we've got to find ways of increasing affordable housing delivery, because the impact of that is, people can't get a home, they're in temporary accommodation, and that puts a whole pressure on the city overall. So increasing affordable housing delivery is really important for Birmingham overall. It's not just a Birmingham problem, it's a problem in a number of cities across the country. But we need the private sector to be delivering more affordable housing, and the public sector also to be doing more in terms of registered social landlords, the city council through direct delivery. The city council itself is still one of the biggest providers of social housing in Birmingham. But we need to be doing more and more in that area to try and meet our housing need. So that's one of the biggest challenges we face. Moving away in terms of carbon emissions from the reliance on the car is going to take a number of years to do that. But we're making progress, certainly in terms of, you're seeing, new hydrogen buses coming onto the Fleet National Express, more electric buses coming through, the investment Transport for West Midlands are making in terms of the sprint infrastructure, other key priority transport routes, the expansion of metro through Digbeth. So you're seeing some big projects like that coming forward. But the pace of change for that and the investment that is needed to deliver that reduction in carbon emissions, it's huge. So, and similarly for, if you look at the council's own stock, housing is a massive source of carbon emissions. So, retrofitting, for example, the existing housing stock to bring it up to standard in terms of zero carbon emissions is a huge challenge, but also a big economic opportunity, because you're talking about, new technologies or more solar panels, ground source heat pumps, improving energy efficiency in terms of insulation. And you could create a whole new economy around that. So it's trying to, get that base right, so we get the investment coming in and can really push the retrofit agenda across the city overall. So it's mainly about, I think, the challenges around the pace and scale of change, really, and actually providing the right types of housing that we need.
So the housing that you currently have, is the intention to improve it in the best way you can? There's some of the RSLs I've noticed that are disposing of their older assets and they're looking to build newer, because that's an easier thing to do rather than trying to invest money in older properties.
So I think it's going to be a bit of both, really. I think in some cases retrofit will definitely be the right option, and for the vast majority of the private stock, retrofit will be the way to go. And large elements of the public stock as well. We've just bid successfully for nearly 25 million of social housing decarbonisation fund, and we're match funding some of that, further funding as well from the council to improve the energy efficiency of our own homes. But yeah, you're right. The balance then is, well, if a particular house is such poor quality in terms of its current energy performance, actually demolition might be the better way to go. But then you've obviously got to take account of the carbon that's used in terms of building new dwellings. So it's trying to get that right balance. But I think what you'll see is in some cases, retrofit will be the right way to go. In other cases, you'll be looking at more, Ladywood being a good example, where we're just taking that through cabinet, where probably redevelopment is the right way to go because of the poor quality of the existing housing that's there.
So you mentioned that the private sector can also do more towards affordable housing. I guess one of the challenges is trying to balance costs of a development with the element that may be towards affordable housing. How do you think that can best work going forward?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? From a viability point of view. And it's, ultimately we need to see an adjustment in terms of land values, and recognising that actually we need to be getting to 35% affordable housing as a standard rather than as an exception. So you do see schemes which have hit 35%, Langley with the sustainable urban extension there is 35% affordable housing. That's nearly 5,500 homes. So they built that in from the start. It's always needed to be policy compliant because it was a former greenbelt site. And the developers there, I think, have done a good job in saying, that's sort of built in at the start, so 35%. But then other schemes in the city centre were struggling maybe to get 6, 7, 8% affordable housing, and that's nowhere near enough. So we need to see the city centre. There needs to be certainly a more change there, which gets us much more closer to that 35%, and we're getting more of a mix of affordable properties coming forward. So that is a challenge viability-wise, and we wouldn't ignore that. You've obviously got pressure as well in terms of the building construction standards, pushing for higher EPC ratings of buildings. But ultimately, we've got to be providing more affordable homes for people. You can't have thousands of people in temporary accommodation because we haven't met, the level of housing need that we have. So I think it's trying to get that, was that adjustment that is standard and not an exception, really. So we need to see that coming through, and that will probably mean an adjustment in land values in the longer term. But I think developers need to be more taking that into account, rather than going down the viability route. If we paid so much for the site, we can only afford now 7, 8% of affordable housing. That's not going to wash going forward.
Yeah, I guess when we talk about the areas like Ladywood, where traditionally house values would be much lower there, as they get pushed up in development, and ultimately will push out the next generation of people to be able to live.
Yeah, I mean, Ladywood, just to clarify that, I mean, that's certainly not the intention at Ladywood. So the intention is to retain the existing community there. All the plans that Berkeley Homes, our preferred bidder, have put in place, it's all about a one move principle. So, if you're having your housing demolished as part of that scheme, you will be provided with a new home, and to be able to make that one move rather than having to leave the area and come back, which can be very disruptive in the existing community. So I think, luckily at Ladywood, we've got an experienced partner there who's done a number of big estate regeneration schemes elsewhere in the country, is looking at how we can then phase, for example, the early phases of that will provide replacement council houses, allowing people to move out of their existing units into new accommodation, retaining them within the area, and looking then to build more affordable housing as part of that scheme. And we very much want to work with Berkeley to try and push the affordable housing percentage as high as we can.
So with the new development of homes that the council will own, sort of council accommodation going forward, is that mostly developed and owned by the council, or is that in partnership with developers as well? And we could mention about homelessness.
Yeah, definitely. So it'd be a combination of both, I think. I think there'll be some continuing direct delivery. I mean, we've got our Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust programme, which is, that's still churning out hundreds of new social houses per year, which is really good for Birmingham. That's been a main source of affordable housing in the past. I know Paul Kitson wants to do more and more with that, so trying to grow that sector more. So that's a key objective for that area. But equally, there's opportunities to do more joint ventures. We want to see registered social landlords building more within the city, so encouraging them back in and providing new development as well is going to be really important. So it's a combination, really. The council owns a lot of land as well, so there's potential to do joint ventures with the private sector there to see more affordable housing built as well.
And homelessness we touched on earlier, emergency housing, temporary housing, these figures seem to be quite high, or when they feel that the numbers are quite high. How's that compared to other neighbouring authorities around the country, the pressures that you have in Birmingham?
Yeah, it's not dissimilar to other core cities. I think a lot of the core cities are experiencing the same issues as Birmingham. But equally, having families in temporary accommodation is incredibly disruptive for those families. So, we're all trying to change the dial. I mean, ultimately, it's trying to provide more social housing and increase the pace and scale of housing delivery. I mean, housing is a national problem, not just it's not a Birmingham problem specifically. You look at the housing supply issues across the country. Many authorities are struggling. In fact, the West Midlands is probably one of the few that actually, and it's how we've planned to 2030. All of the authorities have increased their trajectory of housing growth, and they're generally been on track to meet our housing needs 2030. But if you look beyond that, there's even bigger housing challenges coming up, which we now need to start planning for over the next few years to make sure we're meeting that need. But it's not just a Birmingham problem, it's a national problem. The scale of housing growth is just not enough to meet demand. And you see house prices be rising until recently. That causes more pressures for people getting onto the housing ladder. So we really need to change that dynamic and to get more houses built, and particularly more affordable housing that gets people out of TA.
Yeah. Many of the people that be listening or watching this podcast are either small to medium time investors and developers. So what do you think the opportunities for them in Birmingham? What would you say?
I mean, I think SME developers, have a vital role to play in the economy. It's easy to look at the bigger schemes, but actually the SME developers play a critical role. When you look at our land supply, we've got a lot of small sites, windfall sites, which generally go to the SME sector. So seeing that SME sector grow and be successful and bringing those sites forward is incredibly important to meeting our housing needs and supporting the economy overall. So yeah, they've absolutely got a vital role to play. So we've still got programs out there now where we're looking, for example, through the Share Prosperity Fund, about how we can support SME growth overall. So we're keen to support that SME sector, see it continue to grow. But from a developer point of view, yeah, they're absolutely vital in terms of the growth of the economy.
What would be the best way for small and medium-sized developers to engage or get involved the council, to understand what opportunities there may be for potential partnership, or is it a case of those smaller schemes are just not viable for the council to work with smaller developers?
I wouldn't say necessarily said that, but I think we'd almost be open to looking at opportunities with smaller developers. But I mean, ultimately for me, it's about enabling smaller developers to come forward and bring forward their schemes successfully. Most of them do. But I'd always encourage sort of early pre-application engagement on their schemes. I think I've seen some examples where, they haven't done pre-apps as effectively as they could. You then get an application in and you're almost having to negotiate through the application process, which is never the best way of going about it. So sometimes on very small sites, you don't necessarily need pre-apps, but in a large majority of cases, having pre-apps is the best way to go. It can really help SME developers, smooth the process, as well as with bigger schemes. But if you've got a scheme of 20, 30 units, getting the pre-app in early, addressing some of the issues with that site is the best way of really getting a smooth process through planning and then getting on site as quickly as they can.
Yes, there often is this thinking that it's us and them as developers and the planning, although we're all trying to achieve the same thing, create quality accommodation. And would you say pre-app is the best route in terms of engage and involve?
The vast majority of applications we approve. So, we're very efficient now in terms of the planning service we offer in the city. I think, 90% of applications we're determining in the statutory time period if you look across the piece. So, but equally, it's difficult for the planners if an application comes in, it needs loads of work, it's poor design. There's issues with adjoining, whether it's listed buildings or whatever, haven't been thought through properly. There hasn't been any engagement in terms of transport and impacts on the transport network. And then you're almost having to negotiate that through. So that's where schemes get into difficulty. If those issues haven't been addressed up front, you end up then having to withdraw the application, resubmit it. And that's not being adversarial or negative to SME developers or any developer, but it's about getting the right quality of scheme coming forwards, and the teams are very committed to achieving high quality of development, and to design, in terms of the impacts of those schemes on the transport network. They've got to hit the right standards in terms of our Birmingham design guide to get supported and get through. So, we don't want to be approving poor quality schemes that people then go, why on earth did that get planning consent? So I don't see it as adversarial. I see it as us trying to push for a high standard of development within the city, achieve the right outcomes. But developers can help themselves by early pre-app engagement, so we address those issues early on. And then when the application does come in, they get a much smoother process in terms of how we get that through.
Yeah. Because one thing we're starting to see, not just across Birmingham, but across the country really, is the demand for retail property starting to fall as our buying habits change.
Yeah.
And even, unfortunately, some of the larger retailers from Birmingham leaving as well.
Yeah.
How do you think that will impact the market and overall the use of those buildings? Because some of those buildings are so big, you think, what else can you do with them?
Yeah, and you're seeing that in the places like the Bullring, where former big retail stores are being converted into more leisure box spaces. So I think the market will just keep evolving really, and those traditional big footprint retailers, are becoming more of a thing of the past, but equally you're seeing that space being reused, whether it's for hotels or offices or leisure spaces. So I think the market will just evolve. I think the challenge is for more sort of local centres, where they house the local centres in particular, but having said that, you've seen a lot of centres really, perform well during things like COVID. They've almost recovered well because there's more demand locally, with people sometimes maybe working more from home, means the more they use more of their local amenities. So I think you will see a continuing, retail will continue to evolve, and the impact of online retailing has been huge on the retail sector. I think you'll see just conversions coming forward for residential, which you can often do now under permitted development anyways. And I think you'll still see that, there's still a big role for local centres. People still want local centres, but it may be more for going for coffees, meeting up with people, rather than that traditional retail offer we've had in the past.
More experience-based rather than...
Yeah, experience-based. You need to encourage people into local centres now. But I think if you can get that right, you're seeing centres like Surgery, for example, have really gone through a renaissance over the last few years, because they've got that retail offer right, new independents coming in, which is attracting people to that centre, which is great to see. So centres will need to evolve. We need to put the right support in place, protecting, key core of retail areas, but equally recognising that there's going to be change in some of them too.
I guess one of the other changes or potential changes is there's a lot of quality office space that's being created, new office space in Birmingham, and there's a lot of existing office space as well, and talk of more and more people maybe working from home, less office space required. Do you think that could also impact the market, lower demand, or?
Well, I mean, you'd immediately think that, but that's not necessarily been the case. I mean, you're still seeing good demand for office space coming forward. And I think in some ways you're seeing a bit of a move back into the office now as well. So I think where you see some of these new spaces being created, whether it's a 103 Colmore or a Paradise, it's about bringing people together in that office environment. And, they're still creating, having people in offices, so there's very much going to be demand for that, both now and in the future. So whilst the configuration of that office space might be different, about collaborating, meeting clients and, having that sort of more shared working environment, there's still demand, and I think that's, in many ways you've seen quite a good return to the office now. It's about balance, isn't it? And I think you'll see, whilst it might be 5 days a week, 3 days a week is still very, very much very common now. And as you look outside, there's still good demand for office space coming forward, and the buildings which have been built are letting very well. So yeah, I'm not concerned about the office market. It's probably just slight change in the nature of the product that's being provided.
A lot of what we've been talking about is the city centre within the ring road. How do you think the rest of the city, or what else is happening within the rest of the city in terms of regeneration? Will it be left out, or?
Definitely not. No, I mean, you look at Perry Bar. I mean, the council's invested 750 million into Perry Bar on the back of the Commonwealth Games. So, I mean, you've seen the complete transformation of Perry Bar. Nearly 1,000 homes have been built there. For future phases will provide, thousands more homes, with the council playing a role in how we bring those sites forward for development. So Perry Bar's benefited from new stations, sprint bus infrastructure, new cycle lanes, new open space. It's completely transformed that part of the city. I've talked about Ladywood, which is a big urban regeneration site, which would be a massive opportunity going forward. And you've got sites like City Hospital in that corridor as well, which Homes England are coming in for planning for shortly. So that's coming through. That greater Wicknell growth area will see thousands of new homes built over the next sort of 10 years. So, that's very much in the city, suburban part of Birmingham, which will see huge change. So, a big growth agenda there. East Birmingham, with the inclusive growth strategy we put in place, there's some big opportunities there. We've got the old wheel site coming forward. So we're on site there now with remediation. So that's all happening as well. We've got wider growth opportunities in that corridor through direct delivery for new homes. Yardley Brook Sewage Works, for example, is coming forward for new developments. And then plans to the south of Birmingham as well, with Druids Heath regeneration. Longbridge with St Modwin's continuing to bring that site forward at pace. So they've got their application in. Well, they've got planning consent now for the old MG works. They're making real progress with the West works as well. We're seeing significant development coming forward. So yeah, I think you're right with your question. It can sometimes be an unhealthy focus on the city centre, but there's a massive array of growth coming forward outside of the city core, which is delivering thousands of new homes. And I haven't even mentioned Langley As I said earlier, that's 5,500 houses in Sutton Coldfield. They're starting on site next year. They got planning through at the back end of last year. Peddingmore's on site on the other side of the A38 to Langley. Amazon are due to take occupation of that building later this year, which is one of their national hubs. That's going to create thousands of new jobs. And they'll be on site again with the next buildings as well coming forward. So, massive growth agenda, across the whole of the city, not just the city centre.
And with the current economic climate right now, with interest rates continuing to rise, inflation still being very high, the market generally starting to slow, the property market, are you seeing signs where some developers are saying, actually, it doesn't make sense to build out right now, maybe we should hold back on wait? Or
maybe on the odd side, but not massive. I mean, you look at the scale of construction going on at the moment, it's very much carrying on apace. So, you're absolutely right. It's a challenging economic climate. So I think there is more of a balance and a finer line now to make development viable. But, the scale of activity in the city is still very strong at the moment. So I'm sure you're right. On some sites, developers are thinking it's now the right time to press ahead, with inflation still increasing. But having said that, if you look at the scale of schemes we've got coming forward, there's still significant activity taking place. So developers are confident enough to move forward. So yeah, but loads of stuff going on.
Yeah. We touched on Manchester earlier on, where it feels like they've reached their peak in terms of prices, and it still feels Birmingham is probably slightly undervalued, in my opinion. And do you think that's some of the reasons why we get a lot of overseas interest in wanting to invest in the city?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably part of it. But also, I think we've got a clear vision for the city as well, with the Birmingham Development Plan, the Big City Plan, and the growth agenda that set. There's a clear vision for how we see the city growing and expanding, not just in the city centre, but the wider city as a whole. So I think those clear strategies, plans, master plans, people can see the vision for the city. I think generally developers, a lot of the developer events I've gone to, they'd like having that clear strategy in place, seeing what the opportunities are. And I think that really helps them then to bring investment from overseas, or whether it's UK based, into Birmingham, and to help them deliver on the growth. So, I think having that clear strategy there helps as well.
Ian, there's also talk about maybe planning being changed completely. And sometimes when you read some of the things happening, you think, is it all going to turn on its head completely? How do you see some of the talk that's happening around change on planning and how it might impact us?
Yeah, we've got the revisions to the MPPF coming out at some point. It's been delayed, I think, currently. So I think it's still an expectation, whether later this summer or in the autumn. So that will be, a big change in terms of what comes through there. The extent of those changes, I don't know how far that will go in terms of actually addressing some of the more challenging issues we have around housing need and delivery. So, until we see that come out, it's difficult to know what future direction policy is really going to take. Similarly, we've got the population projections coming through and how that translates into future housing need as well. So those are two pretty big, issues sort of nationally, really, which will affect future planning within the city. In terms of planning policy, having the problem with change is, it can delay the production of policy. So in some ways, I'm very much encouraging the team now just to sort of crack on with the review of our development plan, get out to preferred options as quickly as we can in the new year. That will hopefully be post MPPF, so we'll see what the revisions are, that we can take those into account when we go out for our preferred options. But then we'll still see probably demographic projections coming out post the publication of our preferred option that we'll have to take into account. So a lot of big picture changes there with the MPPF. We just have to see what that brings really when we see the details of that later this year.
I guess some of the things that scare me a little bit is the idea of people inexperienced of planning, sitting on making decisions around what could happen with planning applications. Involving local and community, I understand, makes sense. But when they maybe lack the experience, those things can feel a little bit scary.
Yeah, things like
that would happen.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, let's see how
let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens, definitely, before we comment on that.
So in terms of, touched on earlier, many of the people listening or watching are smaller investors, developers within the city, and some even nationally. And what's the route to engaging? Kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. with the...
Yeah, I mean, I attended a Developers Network forum earlier in the year, which was SME focused, and it was, fantastic, really well attended event, and it must have had at least a couple of hundred people there. So it was brilliant to see that, and as an opportunity. And I think I've really, tried to encourage the team now to use that as a basis to move forward, to make them aware of future policy coming through. And I think it's important for SME developers. We spend time sometimes with bigger developers within the city, but actually engaging with that SME base and say, look, this is the future city plan consultation which we've got going on at the moment. We really welcome SME comments on the future city plan because it's going to affect their opportunities going forward. So engaging in documents like that, and I think we're presenting that at one of those future network events. And similarly, understanding for them what level of support is out there. The combined authority have secured more funding in terms of addressing brownfield land remediation. They're been launching more programs around affordable housing as well. So it's understanding those opportunities. So I'm really keen to keep that engagement with the SME sector going forward, so they're fully aware of what opportunities are coming up, which can support them ultimately in delivery in the city. But also hearing their views on our future plan, so we've really encouraged them to look at the future city plan. It's a very ambitious document, but to get their input into that as part of the consultation will be really important.
Yeah, the future city plan is often, I'd say, full of opportunities for us to see where future development is likely to happen, how the city is going to change, and for us to, rather than guess where some of the options will be.
You can see what
lays out there.
Absolutely. And there's some big projects in there coming forwards, and there's some good opportunities. So I'd really encourage your views on that to comment as part of the consultation. It's still got a few weeks to run, so getting your views in, and helping shape the future of the city is really important.
And where's the best place for people to get that information?
It's all online, so you can easily access the document from the website. If people require hard copies, we can provide that as well. But I'd really encourage, as I said, the SME groups, to have a review of that document, along with we're really trying to encourage, younger people as well to engage as part of that consultation, because it's very much going to be their city. So this is a strategy for the next 20 years. So getting their input into that vision is really, really important.
Okay. Ian, hopefully you'll be doing this job for a very long time to come. What would you like to be remembered for? What mark do you want to make on the city?
Well, I've been here for a fair period of time, so I'm lucky. I've been involved in a number of big schemes within Birmingham, whether that's Perry Bar, Peddingmore, Langley. We delivered some big industrial schemes as well. So it's been great to be, to have such a great breadth of involvement in terms of delivery. In terms of the future, I'd very like to see us setting the city on that trajectory, particularly in terms of how the city adapts to climate change, which is going to be a massive issue for everybody. So I think if we can get and I can get Birmingham going the right way for its planning policies on that the right trajectory to deliver that route to zero, that's going to be really, really important. But also trying to change the dial on affordable housing delivery as well. So it would be good if we can do, get our planning policies stronger so we can get more affordable housing out of development. So I think, we need to be doing more in that sector. So that's another area I'll be very much pushing over the next few years as well.
Yeah, and thank you so much. It's been such an informative conversation. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.